Sweeping is definitely one of the most fun and the coolest guitar technique that we have. But who was actually the first one inventing the sweep technique? How did it evolve through those decades? And what could be the potential future of sweeping? This and more we will find out in today's video, the history of sweeping. Here we go! Hey Guitar Team, what's going on? I'm Justin Hornbach, back from my practice cave, and welcome to today's video. I wanted to do this kind of essay about the history of sweeping for a long time now because I love this sweep technique. The players who are famous for using the sweep technique is a big influence for me, and I want to give you like a little guide. Okay, where did it all start? How did it develop and evolve through those years? And what are some cool examples that you can check out to get more and more into the sweep technique? So yeah, before we start with today's videos, of course, please subscribe to this channel, leave a like, leave a comment. Please, the almighty algorithm. This is the best way how you can support me. So much about that. Let's start with today's video, and let's start with where it all began. Okay, it is often really hard, nearly impossible to find that exact moment where a certain technique was invented. You know, people were saying for years and years that the inventor of tapping was none other than Eddie Van Halen, but then you found footage of an Italian guy tapping on an acoustic guitar in the 50s or whatnot. So you see, techniques often already existed up to the moment where this certain instrument was created. And the same goes for the sweeping technique. Starting with an acoustic guitar, with a nylon guitar, with classical guitar and flamenco guitar, people already there used sweeping. When we're going into the 20th century and the early 20th centuries, gypsy guitar players like Django Reinhardt used the sweep technique. And then later on in the 50s, people like Tal Farlow or Kenny Burrell, all those jazz guitar players, they also used sweep technique. Sometimes as a rake, sometimes as outlining certain arpeggios, but they definitely used the first kind of draft of something that you will call later on the sweep technique. But that's actually, to be honest, not really important. It's not important who was the first one who invented a certain technique. More important are the people who made a certain technique famous. Eddie Van Halen is the most important guitar player for tapping because he brought tapping to the masses. And yet Tosin did not invent selective picking or thumping, though he's really important for those technique because he gave this kind of technique to a certain audience. Same goes with Marshall Harrison for Swibrit and all these kind of guys. They're not the inventor. We don't know who invented it. But this is not really important. It's more important who gave this certain technique an audience. And the most important decade for the sweeping technique was definitely the 80s. But before we are jumping into the 80s, what is actually sweeping? If you are new to guitar, you maybe ask yourself, what is sweeping? It's actually pretty easy explained. Sweeping is a right-hand technique where you're using another technique called the rest stroke to sweep through the strings. This has often been used to outline arpeggios really fast. I would say 80% of all sweep players started to do it with arpeggios or doing it for arpeggios. There are also players out there who are using it for scales and sequences and pentatonics, kind of whatnot stuff. But most of the time people are using it to outline arpeggios really fast. Rest strokes means that when you pluck a string, the tip of your pick is not free in the air, like when you're doing it with alternate picking, having this pendulum kind of movement. No, you are landing with the tip of the pick on the next string before you're hitting the string. This is called rest stroke. And using this push, this force, this motion and this movement is really helpful to sweep across those strings. Like Yngwie just swept on my table. I have made a lot of exercises and example and videos about how you can learn the basic sweep technique on the ZEN of Sweeping. Check the link in the description box if you want to know more about my online masterclass there. Alright, now after we know what sweeping is, let's continue to the 80s. The 80s were the most important era for us electric guitar players, I would say. And especially through those players like Yngwie. And of course, Yngwie used sweeping, even though there are interviews from him saying that he's not using sweeping. Seriously? You are! I mean, he is using sweeping a lot with combination of runs, like doing an A minor sweep arpeggio in the start of a run and then continue with a speed picking sequence, or playing a run horizontally on the fretboard and then ending it with a sweep arpeggio. But he also has those long arpeggiated sweep sections, and I would say his most famous one is the 2-string sweep arpeggio section from Rising Force. This song is one of his classic, one of his most famous songs, even though that this section is a little copycat, a little stoned by this Megadeth song, because listen to Rising Force by Yngwie and then listen to this one here. And you can clearly hear some similarities, but that's actually not really important right now. And there was one rule in the 80s that said, when Yngwie did it, everybody did it. So after Yngwie, of course, came all these shrapnel guys. Tony McAlpine, Vinnie Moore, Marty Friedman, but especially Jason Becker. Jason Becker brought the Yngwie sweeping to the next level. You know, before Jason, a lot of people are using more like 3-string sweep arpeggio shapes, and maybe not in those long arpeggiated kind of sequences, and yeah, where you have a longer chord progression and you're outlining every chord through sweep arpeggios. Jason also did 5-string sweep arpeggios, 6-string sweep arpeggios, adding with 3-string sweep arpeggios and 4-string sweep arpeggios, playing around. And I would say his most famous sweep arpeggio section is the one from Serena. And here he showcased really good that when you have a cool chord progression and a cool melody on the side of this chord progression, you can't go wrong with sweeping. And especially with those big sweeps and then smaller sweeps and all this kind of stuff. So Serena is one of the best examples how you can use sweep picking in a musical sense. And even bigger bands in the 80s like Metallica use sweeping. For example, check out this song Leper Messiah by Metallica. This is actually a sweep section. And fun fact, this was the first sweep section that I have ever learned on guitar. It was my first sweeps and I hated it. I clearly can remember being 14 years old and thinking like, what the fuck, I don't know what I'm doing here, it's so hard, the synchronization, the movement. To avoid that nowadays, again, I created the ZEN of Sweeping, and the first etudes from the ZEN of Sweeping, the first exercises there, is based on this kind of Metallica kind of idea and shapes. These are the ones for beginners, while the more intermediate ones are the more kind of Jason Becker inspired 5-string, 6-string sweep arpeggios and the combination out of those shapes. But one person is the most important person for us sweepers. And he is still, even with over 60 years old, the GOAT, the greatest of all time when it comes to sweeping. And I'm talking about the Thunder from Down Under, none other than Frank Gambale. I saw Frank Gambale 2 days ago and he was just mind fucking blowing, and nobody came close to Frank Gambale. Even those great players like Jason Becker, or nowadays great players like Jason Richardson, for example. This is something else. The only person that I know, the only guitar player that I know who comes a little bit close to what Gambale is doing is a guy called Alex Hutchings. But what does Gambale makes different? Well, the difference is in the origin from the inspiration of those kind of sweep sections. While Jason Becker and Yngwie and all those kind of guys was more inspired by European classical music, Frank Gambale is more inspired by modern American jazz music, especially bebop and fusion, and especially piano players. He is a piano player by himself, and he came across the sweep technique by transcribing piano arpeggios and trying to get it on guitar. And through that, his shapes are so differently than the stuff that Yngwie and Jason Becker is doing, a lot more complex and a lot harder. And what he also can do, what a lot of people can do, is he can improvise with it. And this really showcases, okay, when you can improvise with a certain technique that you know what you are doing. Frank can immediately make decisions if you want to have long sweeps, shorter sweeps, this arpeggio here or that arpeggio here, without thinking about this in a situation like an improvisation. This is just mind-blowing. And he also can create some really cool rhythmical kind of sequences with sweeping, like all this kind of weird, cool fusion jazz stuff. And he has such a control over his right hand, his sweeping hand. This is just next level. And again, nobody else can do it like Frank. Believe me, he's the GOAT. My favorite sweep section from his songs is from a song called Little Charmer. And yeah, here is a cover of me doing exactly that. So, and after the 80s comes the, I would say, most desperate time for our guitar players, the 90s. Well, as we all know, the shred and the solo guitar kind of died in the 90s through the grunge movement. Not really, of course, died, but it got from mainstream to a little bit more underground. But still in the underground in the 90s, there are a lot of great guitar players who showed us, oh goddamn, you can do a lot of cool stuff with sweeping. I would say one of the most famous from that time is, of course, the man himself, Michael Romeo. He put the neoclassical kind of stuff from Jason Becker and put this one to the next level, evolving this one a lot. For example, in the intro section of his song Smoke and Mirrors. And then through the weird thing in the late 90s, which is called the World Wide Web,
the Internet, eh?
We have more players coming up like Rob Johnson and Rusty Cooley, both who have a lot of really cool videos on sweeping and with cool sweeping ideas and shapes on a platform back in the day called Shops from Hell, which still exists. Highly recommend to check this one out. And then one of the most important person for sweeping in the late 90s, I would say, is Alexi Laiho. Even if you are not the biggest fan of Children of Bodom, and of course, even if he's not as clean, as tight as Michael Romeo, Children of Bodom was really successful back in the day and brought back the attention to shred guitar, to neoclassical kind of stuff, and as well to sweeping. So we have to appreciate this a lot as well, that we have those kind of bands and players, and maybe we don't like, well, I like them, but I like another band not so much that I'm going to talk a little bit about it in a few minutes, who brought a lot of attention to a certain technique or a certain style. We have to appreciate it. Okay, and after the 90s we have the 2000s, and through the 2000s we have some pretty cool bands coming up through, of course, the World Wide Web, the internet, but also bands developing from the 90s. And there are especially two guitar players that I absolutely love that I want to mention here. And the first one is Jeff Loomis. Jeff Loomis, the master of diminished sweep. He took the sweeping technique and put it in a lot more darker context with Nevermore, creating all those iconic diminished sweep, like for example in the solo Born. Or in the song Godless Endeavor. Or having some really cool 6-string sweep arpeggio shapes in I Voyager. So Jeff was experimenting a lot with shapes, while another guitar player, and he's one of my favorite guitar players, also did a lot of sweeping in the 2000s. And I'm talking about none other than the great John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, of course. I mean, who don't know the 6-string sweep arpeggios with tapping combined from Under the Bridge, or the over-the-top fretboard sweeping from By the Way that inspired Michael Romeo. Of course, I am just kidding. I'm talking about John Petrucci by Dream Theater. And especially the sweeping section from Glass Prison really inspired me, and really showed me how awesome sweeping can be. Of course, there's a big debate going on, like, is it sweep picked or is it alternate picked? Go away, alternate picking. Of course, the sweep picking. I mean, there are a lot of live videos out there where he is definitely showing back in the day that it's sweep picking. Now, some people might say like, but it's so much harder when it's alternate picking. That's not really the truth. Both of them can have a certain difficulty. When you are alternate picking it like Steve Morse would do it, then it's definitely harder to get this one up to tempo. But when you're sweep picking it, it's harder to get it clean and to get it tight, to have every note the same length. It's so much easier to be sloppy with a sweep technique, because sweeping is something that we often practice on a faster tempo and not really controlled on a mid-tempo or even slower tempo. In my video about what you're doing wrong when it comes to sweeping, I also explained that a lot of people, when they are practicing sweeping slow, they're not practicing sweeping. But check the video here in the info card here and to see what maybe you are doing wrong when it comes to sweeping. And then sweeping came across also as well in the 2000s in more mainstream bands, metal bands, like for example Trivium, Bullet for My Valentine, and yeah, even if I'm not the biggest fan of Sinister Gate from Avenged Sevenfold, especially in the song called Afterlife. So, and in 2009, one guy appeared to the guitar scene with a big 8-string guitar on his back, and I'm talking about none other than Tosin Abazi, the man who opened the door for modern sweeping and for the 2010s. Like it or not, Animals as Leaders has changed the guitar world, and especially the combination out of those Meshuggah-esque rhythm, the fusion kind of chords above it, and then combined with some really interesting sweeping shakes, augmented and major sharp 5 kind of sweep arpeggio shapes, and especially in the song K-Fo, he really showcased how you can combine all these kind of stuff and still have a really interesting melody going on top of this sweeping. This opened the door for Jason Richardson, Steven Taranto. That one guy, what's his name again? I know him from Instagram. He's really young. He is not playing guitar anymore that often. He used to do a lot of crazy sweepings like in 2017, 2018. Sims Cashion. Sims Crushing. He had some really cool new modern sweeps combining, like all these augmented fusion chords with melodic minor scales in it and combining sweeping with different techniques. And this already shows, okay, what the next level of sweeping is going to be. The fusion out of a lot of different influences. And I would say bringing it back to the 80s, the fusion out of the neoclassical, like Yngwie, Jason Becker, and the fusion one, the jazz one, from Frank Gambale. I mean, we have in the 2000s and 2010s as well technical death metal, a genre where we have a lot of these kind of Yngwie neoclassical sweeping combined with death metal, like Necrophagist in the early 2000s, together with my good friend Christian, and then Obscura in the 2010s, together with my good friend Christian, and my friend Tom, and my friend Raphael. And especially Raphael Trujillo, for example, is somebody who put sweeping to the next level by combining us with chromatic kind of ideas that was inspired by bebop and jazz players. Really difficult stuff that these guys are doing nowadays. Or Dean Lamb from Arkspire playing some incredible fast sweeping over some incredible fast blast beat with some incredible fast rapping over it. If you are into a fun time, then you should check out Arkspire. Oh yes, oh yes. And so in my opinion, this is where sweeping is going to be in the future. But what is also really important are the people who show you how to do sweeping. And there I want to talk again a little bit about the ZEN of Sweeping. The ZEN of Sweeping is my masterclass with now up to 13 etudes, going to be like 18 etudes in the future with several add-ons coming up, where I want to guide you from beginning sweeper to ultra master sweeper through musical etudes. Not some stupid exercises, musical etudes that showcase you how you can include sweeping in your own next solo, step by step. So check the link in the description box, there you can get the ZEN of Sweeping. This is something where I want to participate into the new modern world of sweeping, showing you, the viewer, here how sweeping is done. And for the future of sweeping, I want to show you another example for myself from the song Arcturus Prime by my band Eternity's End. It was written by Christian Münzer, who I named a few minutes ago by the guitar player from Necrophagist and the current guitar player from Obscura. And there we also try to experiment with different influences when it comes to sweeping. I, for example, in my solo are inspired by the typical Frank Gambale sweeps and some sweeps that are more inspired by piano players, again from my time studying jazz guitar. Then we have the traditional neoclassical Jason Becker-esque kind of sweeping where we have 3-string sweep arpeggios, 5-string sweep arpeggios, reverse sweep arpeggios, outlining a cool chord progression with sweeps. Then we have the combination with sweeps and different techniques, in this case tapping. So more and more we get a great awareness about sweeping and how we can use sweeping not only as a technique, but rather as a way how we can express ourselves. To get to the point how we can express ourselves, we have to learn the technique. So it is important to see it as well, and it's totally fine to see it as a technique that you have to practice, that you have to learn, but where you can realize that you can have a lot of fun while playing it, doing it. Because some people sometimes say like, sweeping sounds are the same, or the no, you can be so creative and so cool with sweeping. And I want to show it in the ZEN of Sweeping. Yes, so much for today's video. So much for this little fun essay about the history of sweeping. I hope you liked this video. I hope I'm going to see you in my next video. Again, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment and liking this video. Cheers so far, stay progress, and goodbye.